Yeah.
There's something where she just go with it.
I'll be back home. Alrighty. I'll be here.
So much really so
We're good, Dave.
Well, and I'm also going to introduce them to and like Polly everything like that, just because we might as well say there's a little before travel.
And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the actually title panel of this year's conference, Never the Same Story Twice. So I'm sure we're all familiar that we're here with Walter John Williams and my mom, Connie Willis, to hear a little bit about your process, how you all reinterpret, reinvent life stories to make them fresh. Questions for you. We could just start with a very good introduction and answering the title question.
Well, I'm Walter John Williams. I already sort of talked about this.
I thought I heard you guys a little bit talking about
at the lectureship. I have deliberately set out to write as wide a variety of fiction as I can. And Jack Williamson is a good example of someone to follow in that regard, because he wrote a lot of stuff over a long time. A lot of it was different. He used different media, not just science fiction, but comic strip. He did academic work. So that's a model.
I'm Emily Ma. Writing in different genres definitely helps to not necessarily, you guys kind of can tell the same story, but with different genre. It will read as a different story. But kind of going along with that, I do a lot of mentoring high school kids who want to be writers or just kind of want to know more about the writing process. And one thing I always point out to them is that we often get started by being inspired by books that we love. And there's a huge, huge market out there for books that are very close to the bestsellers of the day. And it's not something to be ashamed of, because the thing we need to recognize is that we are individuals. And so our take on whatever that idea is, what we see, what we love about that is going to be unique to a certain extent. So as long as you're telling stories authentically from your own heart, you're never going to be telling the same story that has already been told before by somebody else.
I totally agree with that. So I always said I would not write a vampire story. I don't have anything against vampires, but it just seemed to me that there'd been a lot of vampires and everybody was doing a better job than I would ever do. And I had nothing new to say about vampires at all. But then I was doing research for another story. And I saw that there were, back in the Blitz, there was a certain thing called a body sniffer. And these were people who were on rescue crews digging bodies out of the rubble. And for some reason, whatever reason, they were really good at it. They could find through acres of rubble, they could somehow manage to find their bodies. And sometimes they could say, this person's alive, we need to get them first, and they were right. And I thought a lot about why that might be, whether it was pure chance, there were lots of bodies, you're bound to be right sometimes. Or they might have had exceptional hearing because everybody was a little deaf from the Blitz and all the bombings. And so if you had good hearing, you might have heard something, from someone under the rubble, and that would be the secret. But then it occurred to me that if you were a vampire, you could smell the blood. And so my original story idea was simply to have a vampire who went, wow, the Blitz, cool, new hunting grounds. And I'm not gonna pay the price for any of these murders, because you just put it down to the person didn't survive, right? And so I was gonna do this story about this marauding vampire who had discovered this new hunting ground. And then I thought, what if this would be way more interesting if this was a vampire who had lived this very necessarily dark, depressing, wicked life out of necessity, because that's what to live and survive, he had to do bad things. what if the war suddenly, ironically, gave him a new lease on life and a chance to be a hero, a chance to be the good guy for a change. And so he could put what had previously been a curse, turn that into a virtue, and he could actually save people's lives. And I thought that was a much more interesting story than, and I found myself writing a vampire story for the first time in my life when I'd sworn I would never write vampires. And I think that is what, like Emily said, you're bringing your thing to your point of view, your ideas, your insights into the story. And so even though vampire stories are very old and there are a jillion out there, and some of them are really bad, they are, there are still things to be said about vampires. And there are still things to be said about pretty much everything. And so it's a fertile ground. People will say, well, I don't want to get into science fiction because everything's already been written. And you're like, not really, not yet, not quite.
Well, and people who were on my panel, who were in my panel, the lies we tell ourselves, one of the most common lies is that we're not interesting. We're just like everybody else.
Right.
A lie. You are all deeply weird in some way. You have something going on in there that is just nobody's ever seen before.
So it has to be admitted that weird is not necessarily
No, there's that. There's that.
But it is true. You think I'm an ordinary person, but that's not.
There's no
No,
such
not-
thing.
Not an ordinary person. There's no such thing. There is. That's true.
One example that I always think of is the ancient order of the Mystic Shrine,
I know.
who are 33rd degree Masons who dress up like Arabs
Right,
and have parades
right.
and put like 12 of them in a clown car and jump out and they do all this
And in
strange
their real
stuff.
lives, they're fakers.
And they think they're normal.
Right.
Please don't tell me we're abnormal.
Whereas we think we're weird. We're a lot less strange than them.
Look, even just your average Christian that engages in a form of ritual cannibalism once a week is a sacred experience. I mean, come on. And we tend to think we're normal too.
Yeah. Plus, I think that the way you know you're weird is by the things you are drawn to. You'll be saying, oh my God, I saw this thing. And it's a thing that a million people have seen. And you're describing an experience that a million people have had. Only you, however, have said, oh my God, I have to get that on paper. I have to get that on paper. And those are the issues. Those are the things that make you weird. You saw something that nobody else saw in that experience or in that artwork or in that person or whatever, or in some conversation, and things happen to you that don't seem to happen to other people. People are always coming up to me and saying, I had a Connie Willis day today. And that means the bureaucracy nearly defeated you. That everything went wrong and you are the helpless victim of all kinds of awful coincidences.
Where George R. Martin is the author of that period of time.
Right.
Because everybody died.
Right, exactly. So that's what you bring to it, is the things that are special to you, and the fact that you can tell this story to a million people and they'll go, yeah, that's really interesting. And then there's that one person, I've seen this in endless panels where you're telling this interesting thing that happened. And everybody's going, yeah, that's pretty interesting, or not. And then there's one person going, oh my God. Oh my God. And you practically see them reaching for their piece of paper and their pencil to get started because it spoke to them in some way that it didn't speak to anybody else. And those are your weirdnesses that you may not recognize as such.
And you've got a lot of them. You've got enough for a whole career of books, no matter how fast you write.
Right. If you have survived to adulthood, you have plenty to write about for the rest of your life. Plenty.
And if you're helping other small people survive to adulthood.
That's right. I read best parent tweets of the week. I don't know. If Huffington Post. This is the best thing ever. And it's just tweets that parents have written about their kids. My favorite was this woman had written in and she said, I'm sad to report that my husband went down the stairs first when my 2-year-old wanted to go down the stairs first. Your prayers and thoughts are welcome at this difficult time. Oh, that's a story right there. We all know, we've all been right there in that situation.
Well, and I mean, it's interesting if you think about how much of our conversation is saying things that happen to all of us all the time. And yet we still listen to it.
Right.
You know, I mean, the fact that we even have social get-togethers or have anything to do with each other as a species, given our experiences, shows that, you know, we always are bringing something unique in the way that we tell the story or the thing that we saw.
Yeah, Lily Tomlin said that if aliens came to the planet, and the thing they would be most impressed by is, and the thing that they thought we did, that humans did, they're like, everybody always said, oh, humans have wars and humans do. She said, no, they stand very close to each other, facing each other, and yammer at each other. And that's what they do all the time, all day long. And that is very, not necessarily, I mean, we think it's the norm, but maybe not. Maybe not, maybe that is.
Well, along those lines, I forget the name of the author, but you would write about alien cultures and with such a genuineness that I've always found incredibly refreshing. I went to the Narrow College, not the one here in Las Vegas, but the one in South Wales. And you just learn kind of odd things about your culture. You know, you think that something is just a human thing until you're around people who can't do it. But it's always odd things. Like the one thing that Americans can do, and we all can pretty much do it, and we can do it with flair and panache, and we don't even think about it, and people would, you know, come upstairs from the day room and knock on your door so you could do this thing for them. Shuffle cards.
They can't shuffle cards.
That's actually not like universal. Yeah, it's just like, well, we all know, and a lot of us know how to do like a bridge and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, isn't that what people do? And they're like, no. Like a lot of people struggle to shuffle cards. And this, I remember this author in one of the stories he was talking about the grand, amazing technology that humans brought to the wider universe was adhesives. Nobody else had ever figured out how to attach two things with an adhesive. You know, and it's kind of like, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you think you don't see your own weirdnesses because they're so incredibly normal to you.
I think that's one reason why writers really need to travel. They need that especially just to go to a slightly different culture, and you realize they have the wrong names for all these things. And then you're like, oh wait, maybe we have the wrong names for all these things.
Or even just date, meet their family.
Right.
That's good for important.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, and you realize that not all families, you know, do things the same way. My little sister came home from they didn't have play dates in those days, but the equivalent of a play date when she was little, and she said, oh, my mom, they had the most amazing thing. And she tried to describe it, and my mother wasn't getting it, and she thought it was bread and butter sandwiches with the crust cut off.
That's the other thing, if you have kids, you know, you think that these people would be somewhat like you.
No.
You know, because you're all they've ever known for a certain period of, and they're so weird in so many wonderful ways.
Yeah, I know one guy who,
Yeah.
I know one guy who described his son as an alien with a very good knowledge of popular culture.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Oh, well, I actually had a thought, but it's gone now. Carry on. Talk among yourselves.
Well, I'm proud to acknowledge that I am a potentate in the ancient and Arabic order mystic nobles of the shrine. And I'm a potentate of Mecca Temple, the first temple in the world, founded in the 18th century. New York City.
Yeah.
I am extremely proud.
Well, I have always maintained that you know, the people who think, well, I haven't lived, nothing interesting has happened to me. I need to go fight bullfights, and I need to go on safari and crash airplanes and have my brains bleed out like everything. But the truth is, I've always said, if you belong to a church choir, you have all the information you need to have for anything. It's everything I know I learned in church choir. And my daughter went and lived in England for a year, and she joined a church choir over there. And after the second rehearsal, she called me. She said, Mother, your theory is absolutely right. She said, all of the sopranos are divas. All of the altos are flat. All of the tenors, you know it's true. All of the tenors are on the wrong note, and all of the basses are on the wrong page. And she said, this is a universal, Mom. And I'm like, yes, it is. And I think as an example, P.G. Woodhouse wrote a story called The Great Sermon Handicap, which is a killer story about Bertie and his idiot friends are down in the country. And there's no gambling, there's no horse racing or anything that they can do. So they lay odds on which minister at which local church will give the longest sermon. And so it's called the Great Sermon Handicap. And so I thought, okay, this is a story for people like me who sing in church choir, and then people who go to church, and then the English and the Americans, right? Because it's that culture, right? That story has been translated into more languages than any story in the history of the
Yeah,
It's just
I went
gamblers,
to
everybody
a
gambles.
UHS discussion group online, and they were all from the Indian subcontinent.
Yes.
When I was at the United World College, we were out shopping or something, and Don McLean's Bye Bye Miss American Pie came on. And everybody got in an argument of who was being most homesick by that song. And I was standing there, the only American. I don't think you guys have ever seen a Chevy. Like, just trying to serve me.
But they're universal, and that's the thing about writing, that you're writing about, the more specific your writing is, the more universal, which is such a strange paradox. But you are writing about universals. And of course, in the Great Sermon Handicap, everybody has known someone boring who goes on and on and on. Shut up.
If you don't, you are that person.
And then everybody has known idiots like Bertie and his friends, you know. And it's just, those are universals. And so what you think may be culture specific is not. And then what you think is universal is actually culture specific. So there's just plenty of material there.
But I guess what we've been saying in a long roundabout way is it's not always about the head-breakingly, shockingly different idea. And honestly, those are so hard to sell. Oh my God, they hard to sell. The ones that you see that break out and hit the New York Times bestseller list, 1 in 1,000, if even that. You know, yeah, it's often, you know, it often is only a shade off of stories that other people found captivating, but it's what captivated you that makes it a unique story, right? Or you can be like Walter and break people's heads with every. Yeah.
Could you share an example?
Thank you, I think. Yeah.
Well, like Gideon the Ninth. Okay, that's a deeply strange world and story. Have people read Gideon the Ninth? You know, it's like a space aristocracy with kind of a weird, mystical, magical science blend. And I mean, I can't even really give you an elevator pitch of what it is. It's just really, really weird. And it's New York Times bestselling, and it is, you know, it's a phenomenon. Did it win the Hugo? It won some of the major awards and such by Tamsin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wrote it. But you don't have to be that in order to have that big breakout.
I'm going to ask you all about, I mean, you've already shared some examples, but if you could think of like any sort of moment that you've had where something while you were diving, or, you know, the weird Meet the Parents experience, or on your travels or something where you had an idea that you were working on and you had a moment, an event, an observation, an encounter with history and your lived story that really helped you advance or change or innovate in a genre that you're interested in.
I encounter stuff like that all the time, but I can't always attach stories to them. You know, there was one, I was in the city of Ephesus in Turkey, which is, it's a Roman ruin. And there's also one of the 7 wonders of the world is outside the town. It was the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, and it's only got 1 pillar left, so they built this one. That's all that's left of this wonder of the world.
Ozymandias.
Yeah. Except it doesn't even have a boastful
Right.
description, you know. But it was, and I think it was the public toilet that I saw. And there were all of these, you know, it was a square room, and it had running water running underneath these toilet seats. And first thing I noticed, they had really narrow butts. You couldn't pack that many Americans. And then it was just, just this whole weird idea of sanitation in the ancient world.
Right.
And also the things that were necessary to safeguard you when you were doing your sanitary business. Like they had a huge Medusa carved in the building on the outside, which is a protective medallion to keep evil from entering. Well, while you were on your C2Es,
Right.
and there was like Athena's owl, and all of these inscriptions, and the inscription in Greek, or the guy who built this public lab for the public, whose name was, let me think, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Mithridates.
Wow, that's a name.
That's a name. And all that meant was that he was one of Augustus's slaves who had made himself rich, got free, and came out to his home country and killed the toilet.
It's called the necessary for a reason.
Yeah,
That's
right.
right.
And it's next to the brothel. I don't know whether these two facts are related or not. There's the Porneon, right? And the Porneon is on the main road leading up from the harbor, if they want to track the sailors. And it's carved into the sidewalk on the way to the Porneon is a little, because they can't assume that everybody's literate. So you can't have a little sign that says this way to the Porneon and expect everybody. So what it is it shows a cash box and a woman's head and a left foot.
Okay.
And what it means is women ahead on the left bring money.
Oh, okay. Okay. Same as today.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I haven't got a story to go with it yet.
No, but
But,
you will,
this,
I'm sure you
yeah,
will.
don't get the Porneon.
Well, I mean, sort of illustrate, what I try to tell my mentees. I never understood celebrity romance, Cinderella stories. I never really got it or whatever. Well, but probably still my best performing of all time is someone else's fairy tale, where it's like, yeah, this woman, major Hollywood actors enter her and she doesn't get it. I mean, she's just like, your job is weird. This is really inconvenient. She has some dark secrets from her past that it really does not help to have her name splashed across the headlines and things like that. And it's not some amazing, like, oh my gosh, how did you ever think of that idea? But it's different enough that it made a splash in celebrity romance. It sold, it's probably, I sold over 100,000 copies of it until I made it. It's the first in the series, so I made it free. And it's probably been downloaded over 500,000 times at this point. It's just, yeah.
Well, it is different because everybody's seen the original. I mean, everybody knows the original take, and this is a new half twist on the old.
Yeah, and you tell a regular relationship story, except for the incredibly inconvenient thing that your boyfriend's followed by like mobs of people,
Right,
and it's incredibly weird all the time.
Right. And I think that the half twist, I think, every story I've ever had, idea I've ever had has been stupid, basic, and stolen from somebody else, And it's the half twist that makes the difference. You start out with the vampire who's going to use the London Blitz as a killing ground, and then you do the half twist so that he's the hero, not the villain. And I did a story. I was watching this early in my career, and I was watching All My Children, which I'm sorry, General Hospital. Sorry, how can I get that wrong? And it may not seem different to you, but a little bit different. Okay. And Luke had, they thought he was dead. He wasn't dead. But they were having his funeral.
Spoiler alert.
In the disco. Okay. And I know it's a
As
soap
one
opera.
does.
Okay. As one does. And he came and he was watching people say all these really nice things to him, thinking he was dead, and he really wasn't dead. And I said to myself, oh my God, they stole that from Huck Finn, or not Huck Finn, from Tom Sawyer, where Tom and Huck are thought to be dead. And I thought, well, if they can steal it, I can steal it. Let's see, what could I do with that story? But of course, everybody's told that story a zillion times. There's nothing left to tell. It's interesting to know what people think of you after you're dead, or think you're dead, but not that interesting. And then I thought, okay, well, what if I put a half twist on this? And this guy is thought to be drowned, and he comes to the back of the church and he watches his funeral, And here's all the nice things people say about him. And then the next day, his body washes up on shore. And I thought, well, that's just enough of a twist. And we'll get this story generated. And I thought that was really interesting. And whereas the other story was not interesting at all. I think so many times you can just take an old idea, put a half twist on it, that makes you think about it in a slightly different way. And that's what you did with your.
Well, it's very easily like, I don't like this. Huh, this is why I don't like it. What if I try to
Here's what's wrong with this idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can make this idea.
Yeah.
Do you do that a lot, Walter?
Yeah, well, I try to make it different when I'm using an old idea. Sometimes, my approach to it, is a little different. I'm writing this fantasy series, and so I'm taking on a whole lot of fantasy tropes. And what I try to do is try to think, well, how would this play in the real world?
like the knights going out to the dragon
Yes.
with the bureaucracy and can we please stop partying and actually do the quest? Yeah.
And and how, what is, how did, and so and so you end up with, yes, there is a bureaucracy. And the guy who kills the dragon ends up being appointed the Lord Warden against monsters, which is a government job. And that's and they give it to him because they want him to leave town. They don't want him to hang around. They want him to go off to some remote part of the country and fight a wyvern or something. And I thought, yes, that's exactly where it would be.
Right, right. This is what really happened.
You don't want to kill a really serious monster because then you're going to be asked to do that for the rest of your miserable life.
It's like if you write that breakout bestseller book, which is what you tell yourself after your first book is how you break out bestseller book. And but how hard would it have been to live up to it a second time?
Yeah, I remember reading an article in the New York Times about disappointment. The young promising writers who were once getting $1 million advances and now nearly $500,000.
Oh, poor thing.
And it made me want to weep.
Made you want to do something.
Well, Spider-Man is the genius of Spider-Man. It's a half twist. They've said that whoever was reading all those Superman comics, then said, this is not what it would be like if you were really a superhero. You wouldn't just be, your life would not be Clark Kent. You would be a pizza delivery boy because you couldn't be relied on to turn up, and you couldn't even deliver the pizzas on time because you had to go save the planet. And then you couldn't tell anybody, so everybody would immediately assume the worst about what you were really doing. And that's all Spider-Man is. It's brilliant, but it's so simple.
And then you make them a teenager sometimes.
Right.
And it just amps it all up.
And it amps
And
it all up.
everybody's going to assume the absolute worst.
And then he gets in a fight, he gets his costume all wrecked, and he has to sew it back together.
Together.
He can't get anyone to sew his costume.
I know, and nobody ever has to do that with Superman, and you know that really that's what happened. So that's one way to generate ideas. Yeah, I like it. But they're everywhere. I was at a Tupperware party one time. The only science fiction writer to have ever written about a Tupperware party. And
Challenge accepted.
all right, go right ahead. But you have to go to the Tupperware party to do research, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. But
Paper chip. It's no paper chip.
But they always play games at Tupperware parties. And so I was at this Tupperware party and they were playing the game where they put your name on the back, on your back. And it's your Cinderella or your Frankenstein or whatever. And you have to guess. It's just 20 questions, but you have to ask people who you are. Okay. And then eliminate, you ask them if you're fictional or real, and you ask them, how old am I, and am I male or female, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so these are really existential questions. You are asking, am I real? Do I exist? How old am I? Am I a good guy or a bad guy? These are existential questions that we should ask ourselves all the time, but we don't. And these women at the Tupperware party had no idea of the seriousness of the game that we're actually playing. And so I got a story out of that. I was like, this is really fascinating because I'm looking at what it really means as opposed to the surface meaning that everybody assumes. This is why writers are really annoying, because they're always bringing up these uncomfortable things.
And we talked during movies. Oh,
And we
man,
talked
you know,
during-
the timing's so late.
Oh my God, info dump.
And then nobody wants to go out for coffee with us afterwards. I can't imagine why.
As was the Lord Morton in Ordinary Against Monsters. I find that if you just add one more level of realism than the other guy,
Right. That's very true.
then it kind of reinvents the whole thing.
It gets more farcical. It's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
It gets more ridiculous. The more closer to reality you try to drag this thing.
I think that I'm the only person ever to write a space opera where a critical plot element has to do with replacing equipment on spaceships. Right, which is supposed to be done on regular, and there's a whole bureaucracy to make sure that you do it.
Right.
And
if you don't, you're the Russian military.
Yes. And so, it ends up being a murder mystery because somebody finds out that there's fiddling going on in the supply department.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a potential, and so it's once again, it's bureaucracy in action.
Right.
Or not in action.
And the small things that go wrong.
Yeah, right.
Really screw you over.
Well, this common mistake that big writers make is believing that in order to fill a novel, you need too big of an idea or too many ideas. And my first ever Connie was one of my Claire West instructors. The first week we had Octavia Butler, and the very first exercise she did was novels are about one thing. Tell me your one thing. And she went around the room, and we tried, and most of us, she was like, no. That's not novel. The one who got it right was Evie's little boy, who's now, national award finalist, whatever. But, but the one thing that it really taught me was novels are about deceptively small ideas. You don't realize when you're thinking you want to write this big thing, how much you're going to have to pare down what you're talking about in order to get it to fit into the size of the novel.
But it's not really paring down, it's more like focusing on laser.
Yeah. Depends on what yours look like. Mine look have all kinds of books and stuff. I've got to
I like my ideas lumpy.
Yeah, I mean.
If it implies more than an actual statement.
So, well, and I think I was complaining earlier today about Americans tending to think really big and too big. You've got to say not just the planet, the galaxy. And otherwise it's too small an idea. And I'm a huge fan of British and Australian films because they know how to make small movies about small things.
The Dish.
The Dish. We just watched The Dish again.
If you guys see The Dish.
Oh my God, brilliant movie.
So yeah, Australia had the largest radio telescope in the southern hemisphere. And guess what side of the Earth the moon was on for the moonwalk? And it's just a story of them trying to keep this dish operating. And it's so funny.
And they're in a small town, and this radio telescope is in the middle of a sheep paddock, and nothing big movie happens in the entire movie. That first they're having trouble getting along with the American who's been assigned to their team. He's bossy.
What is the American national anthem?
Right.
We don't know the American. Then I'm not gonna tell you.
No,
It's hilarious.
it's a great movie.
The new release.
No,
No, it's old. Sam Neill's in it. It's a wonderful movie. I'm sure it's on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
And then they have trouble. They accidentally they make a simple mistake, fixing the equipment. They forget to recharge something, and they lose the shuttle. They can't find it.
Before a VIP comes to tour.
Right. And they can't find it, and they don't know where it is. And they're trying to, and the computers all crashed because
And they're lying to NASA.
And they're lying to NASA. Yes, and they talked the bossy guy into lying to NASA, and he's like, oh my God, they're gonna kill him, and et cetera. But these are all really like a small engineering problem, a bossy boss, and the fact that these people are rubes. They're living in this small town. They don't really know anything. They're overexcited, but they really are out of their depth in this situation. And then the wind picks up. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all that's in the movie. And the goal is to get these damn pictures, the TV moonwalk that they succeeded at because you watched it on TV.
But you had no idea what was going on.
what was
Goofy
going on.
things were going on.
And then in between, there's the guy, the girl who brings the lunches out, and the guy who has the crush on her, but can't bring himself to ask herself out. And you get so involved in this story. And then you have the idiot.
Yeah, well, they might
security
have
guy.
lied by like maybe impersonating the astronauts and what the VIP was.
Yes.
And then the idiot doesn't understand that and then thinks the astronauts are talking to him all the time.
Yes.
Because it's the same voices.
Good job, Neil Armstrong.
Yeah.
You're on a walkie-talkie.
Yeah, you're not talking to Neil Armstrong.
Right. And these are all little things,
Yeah,
little
it's just
humor,
brilliant.
little nice people, small story. There's no suicides, there's no saving the planet, there's none of the stuff that you associate with big movies. And yet you're riveted every moment of the movie. You're just, even though you know how it turned out, right? You're still, oh my God, how are they gonna get this? Is it gonna collapse on it? Oh my God. And they're masters of this, and it's a really small idea. It's just a small idea.
Well, the movie that raised the money to be able to make the dish is called The Castle. Have you ever seen The Castle?
No.
And it's a story you've seen before, but it's a white working class family.
Oh, yes.
that live at the end of
the airport.
at the end of an airport runway, and the city wants to expand the runway, and so they're going to take the house by eminent domain. And so this family, who really believe they have it all and are very kind of naive and working class, go to court, and basically their whole life gets put on trial. They argue that they have everything, and they you can't buy what they have, they can't get it back, and they're right. I mean, they're
They don't want to move anyplace else.
yeah, because of where they are is their castle, and they're actually right. I mean, and there's so much in the movie that is, played for laughs, but it's also, they're not wrong. They're like, we have this amazing, vacation house, and I mean, it's not what most people consider an amazing vacation house, but they're not wrong. They have amazing vacations there. They have, the way they talk to each other is might seem kind of schmaltzy, but they're actually right. They tell each other that they love each other.
They're a nice family.
And that's one of the funniest running gags of any movie, and it's in the background. One of the sons will be like reading the classified ads and say to the dad, somebody's selling an overhead projector, and the dad will say, well, how much do they want for it? And he'll see how much they're dreaming. And that object will appear somewhere else in the movie.
One of my rules about humor is that the people who are involved in the joke don't know they're in a joke. Right, they are perfectly serious about what they're doing, however absurd it is.
Right.
Yeah.
But that gives them a certain dignity.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because it's not laughing at the person either necessarily. Yeah, because I was a small town lawyer. The castle has this small town attorney who does land conveyances. They keep trying to hire to do all these big cases, and he's like, and at one point he's like, they're like, you represented our son in his criminal trial, and he's like, your son got 8 years, and like, yeah, but you tried, right? And it's like, I never was dumb enough to take the case, but it's like, I can totally imagine being that attorney where it's like, stop making me do this.
Well, and Walter's so right about the humor that the security guard thinks he's talking to Neil Armstrong. He's an idiot, and you are laughing at him. But at the end, when he says, thinking he's talking to Neil Armstrong, good job, guys.
Yeah.
And they did do a good job. But
They did
not
do
only
something.
did they do a good job, but he was part of that. He's one of the people who did a good job. They all did their job, and they pulled off this impossible feat.
Oh, that is part of history.
That is part of history, right?
Yeah.
And they were all just ordinary guys
In a sheep field.
in a sheep field, which is still there.
Yeah.
But it's, and I always think one of the big mistakes people make in writing is they're so focused on the hero versus villain thing that, and certainly heroes and villains are really important, but the villain isn't always another person. In the dish, the enemy is, this thing they're trying is too hard.
Yeah.
This thing is we should not have been able to land on the moon. And when you watch the movie and you see the computers, you think, how did this ever?
Well, and they should not have used an already existing little tiny dish in the zone. Like,
Exactly.
we spent billions of dollars on the moon mission. We could have spent some more on a decent sized radio telescope.
Exactly. But the enemy is the wind. The enemy is the mistakes we all make.
The hubris of the American people.
Right. But there's not an enemy. Everyone in the movie is very nice, and that's one of the reasons you're so rooting for, everybody to win. You're not against, there's no one to be against. I mean, the mayor's kind of an idiot, but and the security guard, obviously, but he's nice too.
Yeah.
And I love stories like that where you get to root for everyone. So when I write, almost all of my stories do not have a villain per se in them. The villain is why people are stuck in a situation they don't fully understand. They're forced to make life and death decisions when they do not have all the necessary information to make the right decision, and they're doing the best they can. And the enemy is
Too big.
and the enemy is reality, or the enemy is whatever.
And quite often the reader knows more. The reader can see how impossible it is, and you're watching people who know less doing the best with what they got.
Doing the best that they can. But I always think those make very interesting.
Which is very general things to say, but again, this is where you're gonna bring your own weird quirk to your story. We all have different blind spots. We all have different concepts of what could be a blind spot. You know, I mean, you're always going to do something that's a little bit unexpected to other people because their minds don't work the same way. They're not you.
Right. And we're always trying to communicate and failing miserably. Human language is a terrible, clunky stone axe of a thing to try to use to run the world.
Yes.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes. So there's burning questions from the audience.
I
Yes.
think very question.
I think you're asleep.
Yeah.
We're not asleep, we've been listening.
They've
We've been calling them weird all the
they've been there 3 hours just like we have.
Getting back to what you were talking about, difference in cultures. When I was in college, someone pointed out that you could tell, watch people go through a door and tell whether they're American or from another country. And there were 3 of us sat there one day, and you could tell it every time. The non-Americans would hesitate before they went through the door, where the American would just push right through and barge right through them. And that says a lot about the difference.
Well, I used to teach early morning seminary to high school students, and there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that's from a long time ago, and been through a lot of translations and so on and so forth. And you try to explain something, and it gets convoluted, and the kids are like, I just don't believe that it's really. And I'd say, okay, you pick up a newspaper, and there's a bunch of pictures of babies in frock outfits. What day is it? Everybody can tell you it's February 29th. Now explain that to somebody not from our culture. Our calendar, the way that we adjust for it, the term that we use for that extra day, that sounds like, the motion that a frog makes. It's, yeah, you see newborns in frog outfits in the paper.
Clearly I am from the wrong culture. I never heard of this before.
Leap year, man.
Yeah, have you ever seen the
Well,
little
I
babies?
get it now.
Yeah, if you see a picture of a bunch of newborns in their frog outfits, then you know it's leap day. But we're all like that. We're all incredibly layered in things that that's easy to explain, is it? You could fill a novel with explaining one fairly simple thing to another person.
Right, yeah, pictures of the pandemic. I mean, anytime, anything taken during 2020 and 21, there's going to be all these people in masks. There's going to be there's going to be empty shelves of toilet paper. There's going to be all these, it's going to be really hard for people to get the jokes, especially that were making the rounds during the pandemic, because you got to be there, and you got to understand the circumstances.
Except you didn't want to be there, kids.
No, we didn't want to be there. No.
I'm going to say just 2 things. One, if you ever want to see something that is a fun contrast on cultures, there is a wonderful video on YouTube about Irish people being introduced to Krispy Kreme donuts.
Oh yeah, and all kinds of other things like
And
Irish
then
people
there's a
eating this.
series with a guy who does the memos that were lost between the.
Oh, lost in the pot.
Yeah, Brits. Anyway, he explains things, but when he does it in reverse and gets up and tries to explain British things, I've had people just totally Americans who are just like, I don't understand this.
Yeah, he's good.
So it's fun to do this cultural process. But I have to say that one of the things I like is all 3 of you have a very different take, even on the same cultural behavior. I can almost always count on your characters being, certainly when you read characters being rather cynical about something, I can usually count on those Willis's characters being, let us say, more optimistic about
Dumb
happenings.
but optimistic.
Yeah. And yours tend to be very pragmatic about the situation. But even when it's just the same basic culture, each of you brings something different to it. So, we thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. Writers have this very varied backgrounds, the way they came up, the way they got into the field, the experiences they had along the way, who they knew, who they didn't know, what bad experiences and good experiences got seared into their brains by the age of 7. You know, all of those things make just a huge difference in who you turn out to be as a person, but especially who you turn out to be as a writer.
And I always would tell my, mentees or students or whoever, pay attention when history is unfolding because you're going to see things that nobody else saw or very few people saw. With the first Obama inauguration, the day after, I'm like, who watched it? And my church tends to run pretty conservative, so, there were not a lot of hands went up. And I'm like, do you think your grandkids are going to know unless you tell them that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court screwed up the oath on live television? And it's a massively historical moment. That's probably not going to go down in history. Right. Pay attention. They just, you will see fascinating things, and because you are you will see things that nobody else saw.
Yeah, I think we're working around to our mighty conclusion, which is that your voice is what you sell.
Yeah.
Right? Your take on things, the way that you write, the way that you create characters, that's what you sell to the public.
What you consider worth telling a story about.
Mhm, yeah.
And what you notice during these historical events,
Yeah.
what you brought to it, because it's always different, always.
Yeah, and I thought the Chief Justice bungled the oath delivered.
Oh, yeah?
So that Obama would follow his missteps, and then they could claim, oh, he's not the real president, he said the oath wrong.
And they
Because I
redid
could
it.
see Obama.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I caught you out.
And they also redid the oath later on in the privacy of the White House. Yeah.
Right, and that won't probably go down in history. Those things, that's the problem, when you go back and you research so much of it, so much of the detail, you're just dying to know the details, and they're just not anywhere. And it's not because they didn't have video or anything, it's just that the farther you are from the history, the more the details.
More just sort of a line.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that historians really, that's like gold or platinum or even more precious to them is the diary of an ordinary person. Right. Like there's the big events and the historical accounts, we have those, we keep those or whatever. Right. It's what people ate from day to day and what they thought about so and whether they even knew this thing was going on.
Right. And it's Samuel Pepys who something about had roast lamb for dinner, did my wife, and then so to bed. Like, thank you, Samuel. Possibly a little too much detail, but his diaries are invaluable because he's not particularly smart. He's not particularly important. He didn't know a lot of important people, but he himself was not important. But he lived through he lived through the fire. Well, he lived through the plague.
Well, isn't there some assignment that some people were doing before World War II?
Yes. Oh, yes. The MO diaries. These were invaluable. In the 1930s in Britain, some idiot bureaucracy, Walter John's nemesis, the bureaucracy, they decided they wanted to know what ordinary Brits thought. Okay. So for a shilling, you would get paid a shilling a week if you would fill out a diary and just keep a diary of your daily life. They didn't care what you wrote. There were no restrictions of any kind. Tell us what you thought. Okay. And so this continued on for several years, and then the war broke out, and nobody thought to tell them to stop. And so throughout the entire Blitz and the entire war, all of these people, waitresses and laborers and some of the members of the fire watch and all of these just very ordinary people who ended up being canteen workers in the tube shelters and people who got enlisted in the army and people who were nurses and all this, they have this incredible record of the Blitz that they would never have had without these MO diaries.
And there was British were up to similar things in Germany. I don't know if you know this.
No.
There was a fellow, he was a pollster,
And he decided that he could stop the impending war with it, 1939. And so he was sending his pollsters into Germany to told them about whether they wanted war and peace. Right. Except that he felt he had to send them in disguise. So they all went into Germany disguised as golfers.
Okay.
And he went in disguised as a head golfer or something, I don't know, but he was trying to coordinate all of this. And the data they were getting was that the Germans were much for peace. And he thought that if he just published the results, Hitler would look at this poll and go, oh, well, my people want peace, I guess I better give it to them.
Which he did, right?
And well, the problem was that, in September 1939, they had to call a sudden end to this project because the war had just started. But I thought, sending pollsters to a foreign country disguised as golfers.
That's really cool.
Yeah, in order to prevent a major war.
You can't put that in a book.
Oh
my gosh.
I know some people who can do it. I think they do a good job with it.
But it sounds like a great.
Thank you, guys.
If you are interested and available, come and go.